2 weeks went by and Vincent still hadn't heard a word from Melinda. Her wedding was in a week, and at this point he was wondering if he was even still invited. She hadn't cleared anything with the flight, which she had insisted her rich fiance would hook him up with. Vincent was starting to have the sinking feeling that their relationship was over. Most online friendships were like ships passing in the night or fire sales. After you squeezed every bit of joy out of a game, disappeared, and whoever didn't grab their go bag and come with you, they were left behind, never to be heard from again. Dustin and Vincent had been together so long and through so many different games that he hadn't assumed they'd ever break up. At least not as typically as most of these relationships did, but he was beginning to accept that this must have been the case. Vincent had texted walls and walls of texts that went unread. And truth be told, he hadn't even courted women he was into as hard as this. He supposed that this new man more than likely convinced her to give up games altogether. Though it was hard to accept that people you cared about had weaknesses, she certainly had weaknesses. She was convinced to marry a 42-year-old man at 19 to basically become his house slave, and it took her 4 years to break out of her rut. Now, he had no way of knowing if her current always and forever was a domineering tyrant. But all he did know is she had been taken in by one before, and though she insisted it would never happen again, it was hard to know what someone had the capacity to backslide back into. So, he was going to cut his losses and let her go if she wanted, then toast to her at the bar. He was determined never to forget her regardless of what she felt. He called her for the last time, hoping to put that beer on ice. But his hopes were dashed on the rocks when he got the disconnected recording. Vincent put the phone down and decided now was as good a time as any to get blasted. After a week, Vincent had just barely assimilated to his new routine. He played multiplayer games from time to time, but they were by no means the social appointments they had been. By now, Melinda was more than likely married for a few days, and May had just came back from a honeymoon. Good for her, his sadness hadn't turned to bitterness yet, but like wine, given time, it could all turn to vinegar. Vincent put down his PlayStation controller and flipped open his laptop. He casually entered in the name Melinda Moore in a Google search. Maybe he could get a glimpse into what was happening in her life. He told himself it wasn't creepy because she wasn't the only thing going on in his life. He had a girlfriend for the past year, got a raise at his job, and had a ton of games to play. So he decided knowing what happened to Melinda wasn't creepy at all. It was just a curiosity. When the first search came up, it was a police report. But Vincent hadn't raised any alarms just yet. There were tons of Melinda Moores, at least that is what he assumed. He typed in Melinda Moore, New Jersey, and the police headlines didn't wink away. He began to become nervous. He opened up the first news report and read voraciously, looking for any clue as to who this Melinda was. It read, Melinda Moore, 32, disappeared along with her fiancé Trevor Kane, 42. It went on to say quite a bit about Trevor, who was some CEO, and mentioned Melinda as a footnote. The story read like a love letter to Trevor Kane, stating his many accomplishments and testimonies of friends. It went on to theorize that Melinda Moore's mother also went missing. So, police believe that they were taken from the house, even though friends and acquaintances believed them to have went on a romantic trip to New York. Vincent was unconsciously shaking his head reading the news the entire time, and he only realized it when his neck began to hurt. At the bottom of the page, he saw the absence of all disbelief. There was a picture of Melinda with who he assumed was Trevor Kane, hugged up at a fancy restaurant. Vincent shed a tear and looked away from the screen. It took a force of will for him to look back. He looked at the picture intensely, as if it were a Skype call. But the more he stared, the more grief-stricken he became. He couldn't stop crying, but he didn't want to make too much noise, or his girlfriend may walk in and see him in a state of weakness. He didn't know how long he was in his grief spiral, but when he emerged, he came to the slow realization there was nothing he could do. Of course there was nothing he could do. But with the nature of their friendship, there was absolutely nothing he could do. He had no one he could call about a funeral, no one he could console. Even if he did pop up, who knew him? When he referred to Melinda, it was either as Lord Dustin Bunny or my friend from online. Vincent was sure she would have done the exact same on her end. Even if one of her friends and family knew of him, he would have been my friend from the internet. Not only was he going to have to live with this, he would have to shoulder the entirety of it alone. He wiped his face with his hand and took a moment to compose himself. Vincent confidently strode into the other room and slipped into bed with his girlfriend. She barely took notice of his presence while tapping away silently in the dark on her phone. When Vincent quietly covered himself, she sensed something was wrong as immediately as a sudden drop in temperature. "What's wrong?" she questioned. "Nothing," he replied, and that was the hardest thing he had ever said. Vincent was looking down at his phone, and the bright glow was all that separated him from the darkness. He texted, "Melinda, are you there?" The computer brain pulsated in thought, represented by 3 periods, followed by "Melinda is typing you a message." "Where are you?" she typed back. Even now, it was unusually odd. He looked down at his phone because there was nothing else to look at. "Why do you need to know?" he texted back. It was an odd reply, and his reply felt oddly direct to him, much more direct than he normally was. The phone blinked back menacingly somehow. "Because we're gonna make you disappear too," it replied. Vincent wanted to drop the phone, but he couldn't. It was the only light in the room. As much as he wanted to toss it, he knew it was his only way out. "Why don't you kill Melinda's mom?" he typed. His hands felt as if they moved on their own. He knew that he would never say that, and he felt the heat rising inside him as if hell was on the verge of opening up and swallowing its latest resident whole. "I think I will kill her, and then I'll come for you." Vincent's hand shook with fear. He was nearly so undone he could barely tap the keys. "Why me? I didn't do anything." "You heard everything." Vincent was going to type more, but the screen was hot to the touch. The light of the phone began to burn brighter and hotter until he looked away. Uncomfortably hot, and the light drove the darkness away until the light swallowed him whole. Vincent woke in his bed in a pool of sweat. The sun was up, and he felt as if he didn't quite know where he was, and pieced it together second by second. When he stood, he came to his full senses, and thank God Alice wasn't in the room when he woke. She more than likely left for work hours ago. Vincent went into the refrigerator and poured cereal. Unlike most dreams, this dream was as clear to him as any memory. He scrolled back to the last reply he got from Melinda, the odd one, and he read it several times, attempting to channel his inner crime fighter. "Where are you?" "At your mom's house." They were out to New York, or supposed to be. He checked the internet for the exact day they were reported missing, and it lined up. This would have been the night that it supposedly happened. Vincent strained his memory to recall the details of that call he may have mislabeled as a butt dial. Grunting? Was that a struggle? Was Melinda being beaten or raped? Vincent closed his eyes in horror, wishing he never thought that, but briskly opened his eyes when he realized it was making his visualization stronger. She grunted, or was losing breath. Maybe someone knocked the wind out of her. He heard yelling. It sounded like a man. Could it have been outside? Vincent stopped with his investigation. He wasn't Batman, and he wasn't going to crack the case. Had he gotten her mom killed? If something happened to her in New York, could the same criminals had saw the text on her phone, then went after Melinda's mom? He said it to himself. "I'm at your mom's house." If it was Melinda, she would have known it was him just fucking around, but anyone else, who knew? Melinda would absolutely have known Vincent wasn't in town, so why would she ask where he was? Who asked that with no preamble? Someone must have took her phone off of her bloody and beaten body and asked what I knew because I said I heard. Vincent was feeling as if his theory was so plausible that it was almost hard not to see it as true. Vincent still couldn't see how any of this information could be useful. He didn't know how he could factor into any of this. What was his obligation? Even with the little information he had, what could he do with it? Could he avenge her or find her if she even was still alive after 3 weeks? Vincent took out his phone and decided that if he could do something, he would. He looked through Facebook until he found her and found a person that appeared to be Melinda's sister. The moment he found a contact number, he called it because he didn't want to talk himself out of it by over-rationalizing. "Hello?" said a female voice on the phone. It was high-pitched and sounded almost like a valley girl. He remembered Melinda made mention of how she lived in California for most of her life and offhandedly remembered her saying her sister sounded just like Alicia Silverstone in Clueless. "Hello? Yeah, you probably don't know me, but I'm Melinda's friend from online." Wow, I didn't think any of you even counted. There was no need to explain what she meant by her statement. It was obvious to him because 95% of the time she was correct. Internet camaraderie was more akin to a well-wishing bus driver you see every day, but never outside of your limited daily interaction. Disposable in some ways. "We play online games together, have been for 10 years. "Oh, and what's your internet name or whatever?" "Cherry Checker," Vincent said at a lower octave, which denoted some shame for having to say that name out loud to another adult. The voice on the other end laughed, and laughed much harder than he thought it was funny. "You see, I played hockey and—" "No, it's not that. You're the Call of Duty guy?" Vincent stopped, never in a million years believing to hear that coming from her mouth. That was the first game we played together." "I actually remember you," she said, as if surprised even with herself. "Melinda still lived at home and she used to play that game. I mean, we used to make fun of how bad you were," Melody said, laughing all the way. If the call wasn't about Melinda's disappearance, he may have taken offense. It wasn't that I was that bad, it was that she was that good. "Whatever," Melody said, as if she didn't really care about any of it. "It got her through Wayne. You know, humiliating you." Vincent knew Wayne was Melinda's first husband, and he caught only the cliff notes of their relationship together because at the time they weren't as tight as they were now. "I can't believe you still hang out." Melody paused over the phone as if she made herself sad. "Hung out," she corrected. With that, Vincent could tell she had considered her sister as dead. It seemed odd to let her go that soon. But it wasn't as if there was uniformity to anyone's grief. "I just called to see if anyone knew anything more about the disappearance." "Are you like a cop?" "No, I'm Vincent. I mean professionally?" she clarified in a more condescending manner. "No, I'm just a friend," Vincent said. He realized that even if he did know her, he was in no position to ask any questions, especially since he didn't want to explain the little bit he knew. "I'm in New York. I'm coming down anyways." "For the wedding, actually, I was too." "Well, I don't know what else to say. Some of her friends are gonna go out and totally get blasted to remember her or whatever. I guess you're part of that too. Chances are we're not going to get a funeral." Melody stopped talking and sniffed. "Well, you said might," Vincent asked. "Yeah, tonight." "I asked for time off for the wedding. Why don't you text me where you're going tonight and I'll be there." "Alright, goodbye," said Melody, who hung up before she even got the reply.